Okay, so take two of this. Let's see if I can make this work. We are going to talk about the the lovely new moon that is coming up as soon as I can get this off, and the solar eclipse that we are having on the 9th. Perfect. I'm glad that it is back on. So we have a new moon in the sign of Gemini coming up, and it is a solar eclipse as well, on the 10th of June. So I wanted to jump on and to talk a little bit about that. I have children up, so if they happen to jump on camera or you hear them in the background, yeah. So we're gonna hop in and talk about that. I have this lovely presentation put together, and hopefully we can do this. Okay. Mercury is retrograde, so if there are technical issues, I do apologize. It happens all the time when Mercury goes retrograde. So what is the new moon? So we're going to talk about what the new moon is first, and if you've watched my previous new moon videos, then you already know this, but we're going to go over this for people who are new. So the new moon is the conjunction of the sun and the moon in the sky. So this is literally, a new moon occurs when the sun and the moon come together, or they join together in the sky. So when the sun rises, the moon rises. When the sun sets, the moon sets. They travel together. It is also the point in the lunar cycle when the moon is not able to be seen in the sky. So if we look up at the sky, the moon is black. We cannot see it. Now, this varies depending on paths and traditions that you follow. So some people consider the moon, when you can't see it, like for the 3 days that you can't see it, they consider it to be the dark moon or the black moon. And they consider the new moon to be like as soon as the first sliver of light comes out from underneath of it all. Other paths consider the new moon to be when you can't see it at all. Typically, the most common understanding of it is not being able to see it at all when it's completely blacked out. So again, that definition varies from path to path. So nothing is etched in stone. Put your own spin on this stuff. So we have the new moon occurring in Gemini this month, and this typically occurs every year around the end of May or the beginning of June. The new moon occurs when the sun is also in Gemini. So you always know what sign the new moon is going to be in if you know what sign the sun is in or what horoscope sign we're in at the moment. So right now we're into the sign. The sun's in the sign of Gemini, and the moon is in the sign, or will be in the sign of Gemini as well. Cool. So we also have a solar eclipse coming up. The solar eclipse, we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Has anybody ever looked into or done any research on solar eclipses? They're pretty cool. They are pretty cool. So a solar eclipse occurs, as we all know, when the moon eclipses the sun, or it literally blocks out the sun. So eclipses can occur in various degrees. We can have partial eclipses where the sun gets partially blocked out. Sometimes we don't even notice it. Or we can have full eclipses where it literally goes dark and the whole sun is blacked out completely. So a solar eclipse is caused by the moon lining up, the sun, the moon, and the earth all line up, and the moon passes in front of the sun. And as it does, it blocks out the light of the sun. Astrologically, this occurs when the sun and moon are in the same sign as one of the moon's nodes, the lunar nodes, okay? So we have the lunar nodes right now are in Gemini and Sagittarius. So whenever we have the sun and the moon in one of those signs or near one of those nodes, we have eclipses. And I'll talk about this in a bit because I'm going to show you guys what I exactly mean by that. So there's 4 eclipses this year. There's typically 4 eclipses most years. So 2 solar eclipses and 2 lunar eclipses. Solar eclipses can only happen during a new moon. So they only occur during a new moon, and they cannot occur at any other point in time. Question for you all. Do you or have any of you ever celebrated or done any magical workings on the solar eclipse? We're going to talk about magical workings in the eclipse as well. So I'm going to give you guys a visual of what occurs in the skies during a new moon. So astrologically speaking, we see the sky from our point of view on Earth, and it's drawn out in an astrological chart. Now, most astrological charts, if you follow Western astrology, are a circle. If you follow Eastern astrology, Vedic astrology charts are not circles, but Western astrology ones are. And the circles map out the sky, right? So we have the sky in the circle. And then we have that lovely line that goes across the middle of the circle that represents our horizon. So as the planets move around the sky, we see them and we don't see them, right? The sun moves around the sky. It takes a full year to make a complete orbit around, to go totally through all the zodiac signs. So the sun takes 365 days. The moon also moves around, but it only takes 28 days to go through all the signs. So the moon moves quicker than the sun does. And as the planets move around, we have a new moon when the moon and the sun meet up together. So the sun moves around, the moon moves around, and then when they meet up together, that's when we have a new moon. So in the sky, it's when the new moon and the sun meet up together. So what occurs in the skies during a solar eclipse? So astrologically, we're going to look at this from an astrological point and then an astronomical point of view as well. But astrologically, we have the same thing happening. So the sun moves through, right? The moon moves through. When they join up, we get a new moon. Now, in astrology, like I said, the sun and the moon happen to pass by what we call a lunar node. So there's 2 different types of lunar nodes in astrology. There's the north node and the south node. Whenever they pass by a lunar node or they go over top of a lunar node, we have an eclipse. Does that make sense? This makes sense, hopefully. So now we're going to talk an astronomical point of view. So a solar eclipse from an astronomical point of view. Oops. We have the sun that is in the center of our solar system, sorry. With the sun in the center of our solar system, all the planets orbit around the sun. And now the orbits, we all know, are not perfect circles, but for the sake of this demonstration, we're using circles. So the orbits, the orbits the planets make are not perfect circles by any means. The moon does not even orbit in a perfect circle around the Earth. So, but we're using perfect circles for this demonstration. So the Earth orbits around the sun, the moon orbits around the Earth. When we have a new moon, we have the Earth, the moon, and the sun. Now, a lot of times during a new moon, the moon is slightly to the east or west, I think, but it's slightly off kilter. It's not directly in between the Earth and the sun, right? So it's slightly off center there. When we have eclipses, it is right in between. So what happens during an eclipse is we have this moon that moves right in between the Earth and the sun. The sun projects the sun projects its its light onto the moon, right? And as a result, you have the moon, it casts a shadow off of the moon. The moon then casts a shadow off of Earth, right? So it's kind of like, I'm going to use the analogy of a flashlight. So when you're in a dark room and you turn on a flashlight, right, that's your light source. That would represent the sun. Now, if you take something and you block the sun, like let's say you put your hand over top of the flashlight, right, you're then blocking out the light of the light source, right? Same thing with the moon. And then you can make shadows, so cast a shadow on the wall or wherever you are, right? It's the same kind of concept. The sun sits behind the moon and it casts a shadow off of the moon. And that shadow is what causes the eclipse. So what does the new moon represent? So the new moon in Magick can represent a few different things. It can represent renewal, right? The moon is starting again. It's blacked out. It's starting to, it just starts over, right? The lunar cycle starts over with the new moon. So it can represent renewal. It can also represent the shadow and the fact that the moon is, well, it's not blacked out, but the moon doesn't appear, right? So it's shadowed over. We see the shadow side of the moon. When we have a new moon, it's actually the far side of the moon is lit up by the sun, and then the side that's facing Earth is dark. So we're actually sitting in, we're facing the shadows, well, not the shadow side, but the side of the moon that's covered in a shadow. So the moon doesn't actually spin. But it's always got one side facing Earth, right? And the sun just kind of bounces off of it. So during the new moon, the moon is kind of in a shadow. So it represents the shadow aspect of ourselves as well. And it can represent creation because there is new things being created. There's a new lunar cycle being, a new moon, I guess you could say, being created from this blackness. Does that make sense? It has to do with creation. It's the start of things, right? So the solar eclipse in Magick represents a couple different things as well. It represents rapid change. So a solar eclipse is external rapid change. It has to do with the sun. So in astrology and Magick, the sun represents male forces, and masculine forces are more action oriented. They're projected outwards, right? So this has to do, solar has to do with our outward world, our outer world, our external world. It's also could be a rapid change in energy that you're projecting outwards. So a rapid change in the energy that you're projecting into the world, or an aggressive and active rapid change in general. Okay. And the reason I say rapid change, the reason it connects with rapid change is because as the sun goes through an eclipse, it goes through a whole year's worth of solar phases in a matter of hours. So we literally go from solstice to solstice, back to solstice again. So you have the sun that's strongest at summer solstice, right? And then the energies start to die off all the way to winter solstice, where the sun's energy is at its weakest point, right? So it goes through that whole kind of full sun phase, waning sun phase, to the new sun phase at the solstice, right? And then after the solstice, the sun gains strength again, all the way up until summer solstice. So it goes through the phases just like the moon does, where you have the full moon, the waning moon, the new moon, and the waxing moon, only it's the sun, right? But the sun takes a lot longer to go through these phases. So it takes a whole 365 days to go through that phase. Well, you have 365 days worth of energy in a couple hours. So that energy is shifting and changing very, very fast. Very fast. So it is connected with rapid change. It's also connected with the thinning of the veil. So because everything lines up, you have the sun, the moon, and earth all lined up together. It connects all the different spiritual realms together. So it is said to represent a thinning of the veil and being able to connect to spiritual energies a lot easier. Now, there is something that's interfering with this right now that we'll get into in a few minutes. So next, we're going to talk about the Sun of Gemini. Does anybody know anything about the Sun of Gemini? If you guys know anything about the Sun of Gemini, let me know in the comments. So the Sun of Gemini is a very interesting sign. If you've ever known any Geminis, what are some things that come to mind? For me, they're very talkative. I have never met a Gemini yet that doesn't talk. They talk. They talk a lot. They also are like information sponges. Like, they have so much information to share with the world. It is crazy. They have so much knowledge stored up in their brains. It's insane. But they talk, right? They express this energy outwards. So Gemini is connected to a couple different things. It is connected to siblings because Gemini is the sign of the twins, right? So it does connect to the concept of siblings. It connects to communication. Now, keep in mind that this isn't necessarily, this is communication with yourself through the thoughts and the things you say to yourself, but it's also expressed communication. Because a Gemini is a masculine sign, it is expressive energy, right? It's energy that is expressed outwards instead of more feminine energy, which is more internalized energy, right? So Gemini is expressed communication, so sharing information and knowledge with people. It also connects to short journeys as well, because it does rule over the third house, which has to do with your neighborhood and short journeys, meaning journeys within like a couple hours of where you live. You guys have any questions along the way, drop them in the comments and let me know. So the new moon in Gemini. When we have a new moon in Gemini, what happens is we take the themes to kind of figure out what to do magically or what these moons are good for. It's super easy. So when you're figuring it out, what you want to do is you want to take the themes of the new moon. So the themes of renewal, the themes of shadows, the shadow and creation. And we want to focus them onto things to do with Gemini, right? Because of the moon, these energies are in the sign of Gemini. So they're focusing on things to do with Gemini. This energy is focused on Gemini stuff. So Gemini stuff is communication, siblings, short journeys, and it's also learning. Okay. So some things that this new moon, not necessarily this particular new moon, we're going to get into that in a minute. Typically, what you can do on a new moon in Gemini, you can renew communications with someone. So if there's someone that you're thinking that you haven't talked to in a while, that you really want to talk to, you may find like this urge comes up to reconnect with people. You can pick up learning that you've stopped. So maybe you stopped doing something and you pick up your education, or you pick up a book and start reading it again, right? To kind of learn something that you may have stopped learning at some point in time. So it's a good time to do that. But it's also a good time to go on a retreat and renew yourself, right? So to take some time away and just kind of, you know, connect with people, but also make sure that you're renewing yourself, right? And revitalizing your own energy. It's a good time to connect with siblings. So a lot of people may find themselves wanting to reach out to their siblings or connect with their siblings if they have any. Or if you don't have siblings, these could be people that you view as brothers and sisters too. So it doesn't always have to be blood. These can be people around you that are like your brother or sister. It's also a good time to do divination in general, to start learning something new or to create something new to share information. So, like writing a book, writing a blog post, writing a post to go on Facebook, that shares some sort of information, something that involves exchanging information and creating something that exchanges information. So, last thing I want to talk about is this new moon in Gemini. So, with the eclipse, when it comes to magic, I don't suggest anybody does any magic, especially if they're new on the eclipse. The reason for this is, like I said, the energy is constantly shifting and changing. You have 365 days worth of energy in a few hours, okay? So that's crazy energy. And when you're a magician, it takes a lot of focus to learn how to work with those energies. A lot. um, so, you can do workings, and it's really easy, depending on what phase the sun is in, to have, or what phase of the eclipse it's in, right? So just before the eclipse starts, it's like in that full the sun's in its full power, right? And then as the eclipse moves over, it starts to weaken and weaken and weaken and weaken and weaken. Once it reaches its peak, the sun's blocked out. So all that energy is at its weakest point. And then that energy starts to shift and become stronger and stronger and stronger again. So unless you know exactly where you are and how to predict how those energies are going to work, it's not a good thing. For beginners, this can be crazy because it's really hard, like I said, to focus in on the energies that are constantly shifting and changing. So I don't recommend. I've been practicing for 10 years and I still don't do stuff on the eclipse. I do stuff the day before, I do stuff the day after, but I do not do stuff on the day of, because the energy is just too unpredictable. It is. So I'm going to throw that out there. So now we're going to talk about the astrology of this actual new moon. So this is the new moon chart for this new moon. This is the astrological chart. So the first thing I'm going to bring up is that you can see from this that there's a lot of planets just kind of scattered about. So this is what I mean by when you see this in a chart, it means that there's a lot of scattered energy. So there's some energy here, some energy there, some energy there. It's not really focused in one place. Now, with that being said, there is a stellium in Gemini. So we do have the Sun, the Moon, and Mercury retrograde in Gemini. So that does focus the information or the energy into Gemini a little bit more, but there's still very scattered energy around it, very random energy, right? So that's one thing to think about with this full moon, is there is a lot of scattered energy in the chart overall. The planets are kind of spread out. There's one planet here, one planet there, you know what I mean? And that's energy that came through when I was looking at this chart. It was very scattered. Very scattered, unless you're going to focus in specifically on Gemini energy. We also have the majority of planets are in mutable signs, which means this full moon has a very unpredictable energy. So mutable signs are changeable, they're adaptable. That's what they do. They occur at the end of the seasons when the seasons are switching over. So every mutable sign is about switching things, changing things, right? So that energy is about releasing things and letting things go to switch over to the new, to bring in the new, right? So there's a huge energy around letting things go and releasing things. Even though this is the new moon, it's about releasing things so that we can make room to pull in new things, right? So there's a lot of change and adaptability and releasing kind of energy going on with this new moon. We also have it in the main element is water, but air is close behind it. Water has Water has 6 and air has 5. So this moon is predominantly a water moon, but is followed closely by air. So this has to do with letting go of your emotions and letting go of mental blocks, releasing emotional blocks, releasing mental blocks, thoughts that aren't serving you anymore, emotions that aren't serving you more. That's what this moon is a mental moon, it's an emotional moon, and it's a very changeable, adaptable, versatile moon. Okay? And you can even see that from the energies in the charts, right? Okay. So now we're going to get into the actual moon itself. And I'm just going to go at this from a magical point of view because I could go on with astrology forever in a decade. And I'm probably going to lose you guys. I don't want to do that. So first of all, we have a huge amount of energy built up in Gemini, which means this is a good time to really focus on your communication. Focus on not only your communication with yourself, because Mercury retrograde is there. So Mercury is outward expression. Typically, Mercury in Gemini is about sharing information, right? And expressing the knowledge and information that you have, taking what you have inside and expressing it outward. So all the information you have stored in your head, you're taking it out and you're communicating it and you're sharing it with others in some way, shape, or form. However, Mercury is retrograde. So when a planet goes retrograde, it turns those energies inwards. So now we're not talking about expressing energy necessarily out to the world and sharing it, but we're talking about expressing energy, communication, verbal energy to yourself, right? What words are you saying to yourself? What things are you thinking to yourself, right? These are the energies. So right now it's a good time to focus on that. It's a good time to focus on sorry. So we also have the sun there, so it's a good time to focus on oh, my brain just went. What thoughts you're what you are identifying as, your own identity. So what things do you pull into yourself, do you identify as? Your sun is the I am, right? This is everything that we identify ourselves as. When it is in Gemini, it's talking about what do you think of yourself as? What do you, when you think about yourself, what do you identify yourself as, right? What are the mental concepts that you have around yourself? The moon talks about how you communicate with yourself emotionally, right? How do you feel about your thoughts and your emotions and the way you communicate? Are you communicating with feeling and emotion? We have all of these energies, by the way, the sun, the moon, and Mercury retrograde are all mixed, okay? So the energies blending together because they're conjunct. So we have this big, like, you know, inner communication of confidence, love, and whatever else. It's all being blended together into one big boggle of things. I don't even know how to describe that energy, to be honest with you. I feel like when it comes together, it's a lot about like communicating things to yourself that are uplifting, that are positive, that are loving, that are nurturing, right? Our communication kind of takes on this emotional and personal kind of vibe, if that makes sense. We feel our thoughts, we are our thoughts. um so we have the sun and the moon conjunct, which means your mind, your emotions, your needs, and your desires are kind of the same thing right now. You think you need what you desire. Okay. So the sun and the moon, sorry. When they're conjunct, this is a good time to bring together your desires and your needs, right? What is it that you desire and what is it that you need, and how can you bring these things together? How can you join them together, right? So when you're talking about the sun and the moon, when you're joining them together, the new moon is a good time, like I said, to bring in creation, right? The masculine and the feminine are joining together. The sun is the divine masculine, the moon is the divine feminine. So it talks about creation. What can you create? What can you manifest? It's a good time to do that. But it's also a good time to bring together what you want and desire, the things that you desire, because the sun is more of like, things that are important to you. And the moon is kind of like your needs. Okay, your sun is your ego, your desires, what you want versus what you need, right? So it's a good time to bring together what you want and what you need. Or to do magic to bring together what you want and need so that you can kind of have both. We also have the sun or the moon and Mercury conjunct each other too, which means it's a good time to really kind of communicate with yourself in a very loving kind of way. So you got to think that both of these are in, all of these are in Gemini. So this is all about communication, right? This is about communicating what to yourself, bringing together what you want and what you need, and then being honest with yourself about that, right? When we're talking about the sun and the moon and bringing this together, in the sign of Gemini, so this is about, really communicating that and being honest with yourself about that and bringing that into your consciousness and your awareness. When we have the moon and Mercury retrograde, this is about, nurturing yourself with your thoughts, right? The moon is all the mother, it's the nurturer, right? In this case, this nurturing energy is joining together with the thoughts and the communication that you're saying to yourself, right? Because it's all in Gemini. So communicating your feelings to yourself and being honest with yourself about things. Really, the sun, the moon, and Mercury is all about honesty and communicating what it is you want, what it is you desire, what it is you need, and just being open and honest with yourself in that communication and doing it in a way that is loving and positive, preferably. We also have the moon and Saturn retrograde. And there's a trine in between the two of these. Okay. So the moon and Saturn. Saturn's retrograde. So typically Saturn is the planet that limits you. When Saturn turns retrograde, the limitations that Saturn imposes on people isn't as severe, right? So this is a time of breaking free from limitations. And we have this energy really flowing to our moon. So it's a good way, it's a good time to do any type of magic that involves releasing any emotional blockages, any emotional restrictions we may have around ourselves, right? It's a good time to reflect on how we are keeping ourselves restricted on an emotional level, and then releasing those emotions and letting them go, really tapping into that Saturn retrograde energy and pulling it into the moon, because and pulling it into us. Does that make sense? So doing magic around, like I said, releasing any emotional restrictions, but you have to know what those emotional restrictions are first, and this is where the retrograde comes in, right? Because you have to do the introspective work to figure out where you're restricting yourself in these areas, and then you can release them. The energy's there, it's flowing, it's really good. Trines are positive aspects, but you can't utilize this energy in a positive way unless you know exactly what you're releasing. So it's a good time to go within, figure out your emotional blockages, what is stopping you from, progressing in things emotionally, particularly when it comes to sharing your emotions with others, and opening up and communicating your emotions with others. What is blocking you from connecting with others on an emotional level, and then removing those blockages? It's a good time to do magic around that. There is good energy around that. The other aspect that's coming up is the moon square with Neptune. So a lot of people lately have been saying that they feel really disconnected from themselves spiritually. This is because the planet of spirituality is squaring our sun and our moon. So it's not just the moon, it's also the sun. So it's a squaring. So we're having some challenges connecting to ourselves spiritually right now. And would be a good time to kind of work through those challenges if you're really brave. But anything to do with connecting with spirit, whether it's tarot reading, whether it's divination, whether it's mediumship, you could find that there's a huge disconnect. So connecting ourselves intuitively to our spirituality is going to be really challenging right now. So I'm going to say doing things like meditation, doing things like connecting with ancestors, spirit guides, angels, tarot readings, anything like that that's divination wise, it could be a bit of a challenge right now because there is this harsh aspect between the two. So I wouldn't do any type of magic that involves anything to do with that kind of stuff. The moon is also our intuition, it's our internal selves. So, like I said, connecting that to there's some harsh aspects there. So that's what's causing the disconnect or the feeling of disconnect. If you've been experiencing that spiritually speaking, it is the square. And the square shows us challenges. It gives us opportunities for growth and development, but it's a very frustrating kind of energy to work through, right? So you could try and move these blockages and work with other things. Like I said, when it comes to pulling in that Saturn retrograde energy, you could pull in that Saturn retrograde energy to help you kind of move past these blocks of these spiritual blocks that you're experiencing with this square. But again, that's kind of, I don't know, that's a bit advanced for, I feel, a lot of people. But it is something you could do if you work with planetary energies. You can definitely pull in those energies. But yeah, so overall, it's a good time to do any type of workings that has to do with emotional release or releasing things that are emotionally blocking you from connecting to other people. Or even connecting to yourself. But it is not a good time to do any type of spiritual work because so self-development is good. Spiritual work when it comes to like astral projecting, doing divination where you're actually channeling spiritual energy, anything like that is not very good because you have that square there with Neptune. You also have Mercury retrograde. So starting anything, the Mercury retrograde itself puts a block on communication as well. So you have that double block in communication right now going on. So like I said, it's not really a good time to commune with spirit in any way, shape, or form. And doing magic is that. So I would suggest waiting until the square passes a little bit. And doing the developmental work to try and, figure out why you're having issues connecting with spirit and maybe working through that. But I think that's going to be a little difficult for everybody because this is happening on a collective. So other than that, this moon is pretty, it has to do a lot with our emotions and our minds and releasing things that we are holding on to emotionally, holding on to mentally. And it's very changeable and adaptable. So releasing things, letting things go. But it is a chaotic energy with this solar eclipse. So be careful working with this energy if you're going to work with it. So that is all I got. Okay. So on that note, before it gets too loud in here, because my daughter's playing with her balloons, she's gonna start screaming in a minute. I'm gonna jump off. And I hope you guys all have an awesome day. Awesome day. And yeah. Thank you, James, for joining me. And guys, I will talk to you guys all later. Bye.